All right.
Okay.
The recording has started.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Emma Rhodes and Kyle Shepard are going to talk to us about bird banding at Fort Morgan. I think the first field trip I took with Weston was to Fort Morgan. They're going to talk about continuing the legacy at Fort Morgan. And with that, I will be quiet and Dan can silence everybody to our speakers. Welcome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for having us. We're so excited to be presenting to you today. I know that we're having to do this virtually because we're still in a pandemic, but we are very happy to still be able to present this to you regardless of the format. So let me pull up my PowerPoint. Okay, that was not the right one. Okay. All right. Can everyone see it?
Yeah, I think Kyle's going to have to tell Dan when he wants to talk, so Dan can unmute him, unless he's muted himself.
I will give a cue to, I'll say, okay, now Kyle's going to talk. And so that will be the cue.
Yeah, I'm in here. I'm just staying quiet until you're done.
All right. So as Jim was talking about, we are going to talk to you about Fort Morgan bird banding today. Our title is Fort Morgan Bird Banding, Continuing the Legacy. So we are both directors, me and Kyle, of Banding Coalition in the Americas, a nonprofit organization, which we will talk to you more about in this presentation. So first of all, I know many of you are probably familiar with the bird migration that occurs along the northern Gulf Coast, but just in case you're not, I just want to make sure everyone's familiar about why Fort Morgan is such a hot spot for birds. So along the northern Gulf Coast, we have these high concentration of birds in the spring and the fall because of the movements that occur. So a lot of migratory birds in North America are what we call neotropical migrants. So in the fall, they're going to start heading south along these flyways, and they're going to either make a jump across the Gulf of Mexico or go circumgulf, and they're going to continue on down to Central and South America where they're going to overwinter. Now come spring, they're going to make a jump back across the Gulf of Mexico and will head northward to their breeding grounds. And because of this behavior that happens biannually, you get this huge concentration of birds all along the Gulf Coast. Now, if you're not familiar with Fort Morgan and the geography of Alabama, this is just lower Alabama zoomed in. And when we look at the geography of Alabama, we can see these two spits of land on the west and the east of Mobile Bay. Here on the west side, this is Dauphin Island. It's a barrier island. And then you have the Fort Morgan Peninsula. Because of where these pieces of land are located, they're located due south of Mobile Bay. And we know from many studies that one of the reasons we have such high concentrations of birds on this land is not just because of the general migration, but because Mobile Bay funnels in the birds and it acts almost as a funnel. And this is going to be some of the last land that birds have before they make the jump across the Gulf of Mexico. And it's also, in many cases, the first place or first land that they're going to reach if they're heading due north of towards Mobile Bay as they're heading back to North America in the spring. So if we zoom in around this spit here, and do you guys see my cursor by chance? Okay, just making sure. This is where we're talking about specifically, and I just wanted to make sure that I show you guys where we're talking about, because there has been bandings occurring along the actual 30-mile stretch of Fort Morgan elsewhere, but we're specifically talking about the very end of the spit known as Fort Morgan State Historic Site. So it's actually on historic lands. where the Fort Morgan used to operate, and now it's just preserved. And historically, there's been 2 sites at the historic site where the banding has occurred, and that is Middle Ground along the old airfield, and then what used to be the stables of the actual operating fort, which is now a nice wooded area with maritime forest habitat. So the history of Fort Morgan bird banding. So from the records, the first records that Kyle and I know of someone who actually was banding at the historic fort was Thomas Imhoff. Many of you may have heard of him from this book here on the left. He wrote the Alabama Birds book. It was the original bird book of Alabama that was cataloging our avifauna and important bird records, bird population numbers, any sort of data that was pertinent to our avifauna. And so we know from the records that he was the first, if not one of the first, to band at the historic site. Now the story goes from here. Kyle and I heard the same story, that if you're not familiar with the sergeants, they were this couple that as children, they knew each other in Alabama, but they didn't rekindle their connection until later in life. So they went their separate ways from their childhood friendship. And later in life, they sort of found each other. They got married, and Martha Sargent was the birder originally. And Martha introduced Bob to birding and convinced Bob that this was something worthy of pursuing. So the way this goes, as the story goes, is that Martha cooked a home cooked spaghetti meal, and they invited Thomas Imhoff for dinner, and they convinced him over that spaghetti meal to teach them how to band and get them in on the bird banding. And so in 1987, we see the first records of Bob and Martha Sargent banding at the fort. And they continued to band and take lead on that project through their nonprofit Hummingbird Study Group up until when Bob unfortunately died in 2013. So in addition to this amazing effort of almost 3 decades worth of data banding at Fort Morgan, it should also, I think it is also noteworthy to mention that in that time span, they had trained around 100 hummingbird banders. So hummingbird banding is even more specific training, or requires more specific training than regular banding. And so this was something that Bob and Martha really specialized. And so throughout North America, they trained around 100 hummingbird banders, in addition to all the people they trained on songbird banding. So this is a few historical photos from Fort Morgan. So with the old HBSG crew, you can actually see Kyle here on the left as a teenager with Bob and Martha. And so the Hummingbird Study Group, they would operate this banding at the fort for 2 weeks in the spring and 2 weeks in the fall. Typically, it was the first 2 weeks in April and the first 2 weeks in October, although that varied from year to year sometimes. So this is how we come in. So Kyle and I were their youngest trainees at the time. We were both teenagers. So I started when I was 14. Kyle started even younger. He started when he was 12. And we essentially, Bob could never get rid of us. He just had to train us because it was something that we were going to do. And so here on the left, you can see Kyle in his high school years. And then here's me learning how to hold a bird with Bob Sargent. And on the right, I really love this picture because this is me in the middle with Kyle on the left, and we're learning from one of our fabulous mentors, Sandy Lockerman in Pennsylvania, how to band birds. And so this is where we come in, is Bob and Martha took a chance with us in training us really young, training us on these federally permitted methods in hopes that, one day we would, to some extent, maybe continue, but at least continue avian research in general. And so this is why we're passionate about this. So why are banding stations important? A lot of times you hear of banding stations like Fort Morgan that operate for many years, and then you hear people talk about how unfortunate it is when maybe due to funding or unfortunately someone passing, it stops. And you hear people talk about, oh, what, you know, it's such a shame. So when we're talking about this, there's scientific reasons why banding stations are so crucial in understanding avian populations and how to manage them for conservation. So a long-term banding stations gives us insight on things like how climate change affects birds. It gives us an idea on longevity and how long birds live. And it gives us an idea about migratory pathways. Where do birds go and where do we need to conserve habitats the most? Where do we need to focus in our efforts for habitat conservation? And then we also get an idea about population demographics. So we can look at how many males are there to females in a population, how many adults to juveniles, and that gives us an idea of how birds are doing on a yearly basis in terms of their breeding populations. And we can also look at population fluctuations. It's natural for bird populations to fluctuate on an interannual basis, but it's important to get these long-term data sets because then we can actually see overall decline if it's occurring in the species. And we do know that overall decline is occurring, especially with a lot of migratory birds, unfortunately, in this day and time due to human cause effects. So this is just a little chart that I made up of a summary of HBSG's banding data effort. So this graph is showing the total number of birds banded and the number of birds banded year by year. So starting from 1987 to 2013. And you could see what I'm talking about. You can actually see these population fluctuations. The other reasons you see these big dips, it's not necessarily bird decline, it's also the unpredictability of bird migration. So, you know, you choose 2 weeks to go out there and band, that doesn't necessarily mean the birds are going to work around your schedule. And it depends on weather patterns. It depends on when birds leave the Yucatan or when they leave their breeding grounds, when you're going to get these huge influxes of birds along the coast. And that is very situationally dependent and is not necessarily consistent across years. But this is why it's so important to monitor migration long-term, is we're able to parse out these interannual fluctuations versus what's actually occurring. Are there declines occurring? And so in the time span that the sergeants were banding there, they banded over 65,000 birds for a total of 213 species. And that span, they were out there for a total of 144 days worth of effort. So by no means a small feat. It was quite an extensive amount of data that they were collecting, important data on migratory birds in Alabama and along the northern Gulf Coast. Also, a really cool part and important part of what they were doing was documenting rare birds and uncommon birds that you could see during migration, or just really weird birds that obviously were lost and off track. So this is not a comprehensive list. This is a few of the really rare or very uncommon birds that you would see at a songbird banding station, or just the bird was way off course. And so we think it's pretty cool. Some of these birds like Very Thrush, McGillivree's warbler. I remember taking that bird out of the net, and I was still a young trainee, and I didn't know what the bird was. I actually told Bob, I don't know what this warbler is. And I was actually glad I didn't know what it was, or else I would have been very nervous getting it out of the mist net, because at the time I had no idea that it was a super rare bird. So they used to run this Adopt a Bird program, the sergeants did, and I still have my picture and certificate where I adopted the McGillivree's warbler that I removed from the net. So that was really special. And Kyle and I both remember the Very Thrush. That was a huge ordeal on who was going to ban that bird. We, of course, were way low in the totem pole, so Kyle and I just watched that unfold. But there's been some really great stories along with some of these really rare birds, but there's also a huge scientific merit in having these recorded. Obviously, if they weren't banding, maybe some birders would see these rare birds, but maybe not. So having that documentation that they were getting of these birds was really crucial and important. So this is a schematic that I just put together. It's by no means comprehensive or complete, but it's essentially an HBSG sergeant's tree of, in the green, it's people who directly were started training with the sergeants. And then in orange are nonprofits that are currently formed and are operating due to that impact of those original people being trained. And so it's just to give you an idea of some of these people that the sergeants have trained that have now gone on to do great things, whether that is to be a director or form their nonprofit or start up other important bird banding projects. Again, if we had all the connections and the people that they train on here, it would fill up the entire screen. So by no means comprehensive, but it's the ones that we're the most familiar with, Kyle and I, and we have seen take off from the original Sergeant's HBSG group. So now I'm going to give the floor to Kyle to start off with talking about BCA and who we are.
Thanks. So again, huge thanks to the sergeants, really for preparing us to make this whole thing possible. Emma and I started Banding Coalition of the Americas in March of 2020. So basically right as COVID was rearing its ugly head. And as you can imagine, right at the start of a pandemic is not a fantastic time to start a nonprofit. The good news is it gave us a lot of time to solidify some of our projects that weren't in the public eye per se. Not that they weren't public, it's just that the public couldn't access them, whether it was private land or we were going to people's houses to catch birds and band and do research like that. So BCA is a 501c3 public charity. We are completely volunteer operated and run, including myself and Emma. So Emma's working on her PhD at Auburn right now, and I'm a contractor by trade. So our mission statement really sums us up pretty nicely. Basically, we're just dedicated to birds in every aspect, whether that's research, outreach, and education. Will you kick me to the next slide? Thanks. No, you're good. So in 2019, myself, Emma, and our third director, who also trained under the sergeants, decided to run a pilot study banding program at Fort Morgan because in prior springs, there was a collaboration of entities that picked up the spring effort and ran with it, but they hadn't done a fall effort. So we saw a big gap in the data that we knew needed to be filled. So basically we put our boots on and got to work. So with the, excuse me, so with the permission of Heather from Fort Morgan, in the top left-hand corner, you can see all of us hanging out in the rain like we do pretty much too often. We got rained on this past fall, Fort Morgan as well. And in the top right-hand corner, you can see Emma and I at the banding table working on I think it's a summer tanager with a brown-headed nuthatch in the bottom left and a Philadelphia vireo in the bottom right. And Emma and Julia checking net lanes, that's center photo. So like I said, we kicked off BCA in March of 2020, and pretty much everything got canceled along with a lot of the stuff that you guys do, which was really annoying. But like I said, we kept hard at work and picked up on some different projects to really get us going for whenever COVID finally started to settle down. Can you kick me one more slide? That group photo. So basically the whole last half of 2020 and all the way up until we did our fall 2021 Fort Morgan banding session was focused on getting that effort together. So it was all of the planning, where are we going to find housing, who are we going to bring down. So in this photo here is most of the folks that volunteered to help us out with that banding session. A lot of these people come from various different backgrounds. Some are retired, some just love birds, some are students. Actually, quite a lot of them are students that actually train under Emma at Auburn. And yeah, so good crew, a lot of knowledge there in between those folks. So our results, getting into the fall 2021 session, we upped the stakes a little bit from our 2019 when BCA hadn't been formed yet. We didn't have any money. We didn't have a whole lot of equipment. We were only able to run 6 days, but got 368 birds over 41 species with the very common birds listed under that. And in 2021, we had some sponsors that really helped us out. Some banders that were retiring from banding that were willing to give us some more equipment. So we were able to really step up our game for the last fall banding session with 8 days of banding and covering 57 species with 436 birds. So there were times there, you can see our bird wheel basically filled up on the left. I think in that photo, most of them are red-winged blackbirds. Whenever you get a flush of red wings, you get them all or you don't get any. So it makes for a good photo, but I think in that instance, they were mostly red wings. The most notable birds that we got this past fall were hugely popular to myself and Emma. Starting from left to right, we had a Wilson's warbler, a black-poll warbler, which was a super good bird for us. And to my surprise, we had a Rufous hummingbird that showed up. And Emma, you may remember, but I think that was only the third Rufous that was banded at Fort Morgan, right?
Yeah, we couldn't figure that out. It definitely wasn't the first, but we only know for sure there's been one more previously banded there, but it's few. It's no more than 3 from what we could find out.
Cool. And we'll run to the next slide. So operating a public banding station, for those of you who have been to Fort Morgan and seen it, it is a beast, for lack of a better term. There are tons and tons of moving parts, lots and lots of things that have to come together. But luckily, Emma and I were trained in that environment. So we had a good jump start and a good idea of what it needed to look like, what it needed to be. So we had about 400 visitors, even with the complications of COVID. We think that impacted our numbers a good bit, but we were really happy with the way that it went. Everybody that came did a fairly good job of social distancing themselves, and we got quite a few field trips out of it. We had a Bird Fest field trip show up and a decent number of birds to keep everybody interested in learning as we went. Just making sure I don't miss anything in minutes here. So part of what this site is a fantastic way to collect really valuable data. So as Emma was talking a little bit earlier, it sort of catches a lot of birds that either wait coast before they head south across the Gulf due to weather reasons, or they just need to rest, maybe grab a few more bugs or nuts or whatever they're eating before they make that jump. And they just hang out there in those large concentrations. So we really need that data for the research aspect of it. But the whole other half of Fort Morgan is the outreach and education portion of what that site can offer. So historically, and Emma and I are going to pick up the torch and keep running with this, is giving normal people the opportunity to see birds up close that they wouldn't normally see, or in some cases didn't even know existed. So what we do is after we catch the bird, we bring it back to the banding table. We go ahead and get a band on that bird, take some measurements, and then before we let it go, we do a little bit of show and tell basically the story of that bird, where it's going to, where it came from, where it breeds during the summer. And then as we sort of wrap up our story, we'll normally grab somebody out of the crowd and let them release that bird. And we've had several people on, well, many occasions that have released a bird that just keep coming back. So we think that that's a really important thing for banders and researchers to do. I could probably count with both of my hands how many public banding stations are out there. It is very few, most of them are closed sites. But we think the public aspect is really, really important to be able to engage folks who may not know what banding is and give banding and bird research a good name and a good face. So how we continue. So besides just Fort Morgan, which basically fills mine and Emma's life along with our volunteers for about a week and a half a year, of actual on-site time, regardless of all of the planning, we do other projects. So right here in the center is a picture of scaly-breasted munia, which you guys may be seeing quite a bit. If you see a bunch of these little guys emptying your feeders full of millet, we feel your pain, but we've been doing a really good research project on these guys, getting color bands on them, monitoring populations, and hopefully figuring out how far they will disperse and how far the young will go to carry that population on. On the left, you can see some of Emma's trainees working on getting birds out of a net. And on the right is an awesome guy named Dylan, showing off. Is that a Kentucky?
Yes.
Okay, it's real small. Sorry, I'm on my phone. That's why the lighting's terrible. All right, kick us to the next one. So part of what we do is train the next generation. So that doesn't just mean young people. That could mean people of all ages, from all different backgrounds, from all different professions. I myself, being a contractor, I'm not in the academic field, so oftentimes I don't see all of the research projects that are going on, or am able to read all the papers and stuff that Emma might see working at Auburn doing all of her research. So actually getting into banding can be incredibly difficult. So thanks to Bob and Martha for giving us a shot and really, I guess, pardon the pun, but bringing us under their wing and teaching us what they know. So we train not only to, we train not only to provide opportunities for young aspiring researchers or professionals, but we also train to make sure this kind of work continues. So if we don't continue to train, then eventually all the bird banders are just gonna grow old and retire. Next. The other half of what we do, besides the research stuff, is the public outreach, education, and engagement. So we spend a fair bit of our time not just delving into the science of everything, and Emma and I spend a lot of time crunching numbers from our banding data, but a huge part of what we do is outreach education. So that could be visiting homeschool groups, public school groups to give talks, banding demos, bring our banding kit and just talk about it if we're not in a situation where a banding demo is appropriate. Guest lectures, educational talks like this, reaching out to college classes and college courses who may be bird centric in a way, doing banding demos for them as well. And we can talk about pretty much everything under the sun whenever it comes to birds. So we try to expand our reach as far as our knowledge goes, because with how much that Emma and I have learned from the sergeants and the rest of the HBSG crew, and I don't mean to just hone in on the sergeants, because everybody that was a part of that crew were brilliant folks. So anyway. So some of our upcoming stuff for 2021, this is not a comprehensive list of everything that we've got going on. This is just what we have nailed down right now. So if you want to come see us, you want to come meet us in person, talk about it, see some birds up close. Starting off at the top, it's the meeting that we're in right now. So hi, everybody. February 17th, Emma's going to be giving a Zoom presentation all about hummingbirds with Orange Audubon. And March 26th is going to be our first opportunity for like a public banding demo. And that's going to be at the Environmental Studies Center in Mobile. They're going to have their big open house. And for those of you who don't know, the Environmental Studies Center is actually an extension of the Mobile County Public School System. So it's a fantastic resource for all of Mobile County schools to be able to pack a class up, take a field trip, and just dive their students into learning about nature. And Susan Clement, who is, I believe, the director there, has been there for a long time. She's a fantastic educator and is really important for that. So I know they've had some budget cuts as COVID has all sort of collapsed down around basically every public entity, but we'll be there supporting the Environmental Study Center and doing a banding demo for them as well. Moving down to April 21st and 22nd, we're going to be at PRAC, or Pascagoula River Audubon Center in Mississippi, doing a banding demo for them, hopefully getting some of the spring migrants in. And then jumping to the fall, September 22nd and 24th, we'll be back at PRAC for their Hummingbird Festival, basically just focusing on catching and banding hummingbirds. We do have our dates in for fall Fort Morgan this year. They're not set in stone yet, but the moment that we get those set in stone, everybody's going to hear about it. I promise. You'll see it all over our Facebook, Instagram, our website. We'll probably send all of you guys an email. Just know that it's probably going to be somewhere in the first week, maybe 2 of October. So moving on to some of our other projects that don't get a whole lot of notice unless you are constantly on our Facebook page whenever we post updates about them. Besides Fort Morgan, we've got our winter hummingbird research project going on. This is a collaborative research project that was started up by Fred Bassett. He's a brilliant man, hummingbird whiz, and he's just a great all-around guy and has really helped myself and Emma really jumpstart our hummingbird banding career. He is also working with a guy named Fred Diedrich, who's over in Tallahassee. And basically the 4 of us work in tandem to make sure that we can band as many winter hummingbirds as possible between November 15th and March 1st every year. So that can be a little demanding because we cover southern Mississippi, all of Alabama, the central portion of Georgia, and Florida. So that's a big area to cover, but we do our best. And by far, Fred beats Emma and I every year with number of birds he can get. That's just one of the perks of being retired. So moving on to migratory hummingbird research, this is ruby throat centric. As a lot of you probably know, ruby throats are the only species that nest east of the Great Plains. So every spring and fall, more than likely, all of the western birds that will winter here are already gone. And sorry. And we're just looking at migratory ruby throats at that point. And basically doing the same thing with them as we do at Fort Morgan, which is looking at population trends, if population is growing, shrinking, how that may shift from year to year depending on weather, timing of arrival, and so on and so forth. Moving down to the next one, Southeastern Purple Martin Project. This is a new thing starting up this year. Emma and I talked to a wonderful guy named Brad Biddle, who is a true Purple Martin fanatic, enthusiast, great guy that had tons and tons of martins. He's got gourds all over the place. And he said, hey, is there any chance that you guys would be interested in banding my martins? And we said, oh, well, think about it. And then it spun off into this massive project that we're going to be doing, looking at least 4 different colonies in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Still working on a Mississippi colony, but if that doesn't work out, it'll just be those 4 colonies. But the main goal there is to visit each colony, band and color band around 20% of the adult and nestling colony. And with a few of those colonies, we will be putting on geolocator tags. So we will be partnering, we think, with TJ Zenzel, and he's going to be working with us getting those geolocators attached to those martins. And basically all a geolocator does is it logs sunlight data. So that bird will get a geolocator, it'll be released, hopefully hang around the colony for a little bit longer, and then disappear with that geolocator all fall, all winter, and hopefully return to that site in the spring where we'll have to recapture that bird, take the data logger off. But then we get to do all of the super fun processing of all of that data to figure out exactly where that bird went, what route it took, and where it overwintered for the entire time that it was gone. So we're really excited about that project to see which martins and which area of the Southeast are taking what flyways. We know for a fact that some martins will hug Florida and then jump across Cuba before they hit Central America. Some will go through Texas and some will just jump straight across. So we're trying to figure out what birds in what areas of the Southeast are taking what route. So scaly-breasted munias, I talked a little bit about them earlier. If you would like more info on scaly-breasted munias, I could probably talk to you for 2 days because they filled my life for almost 2 years. They are an introduced exotic species. They will drain your feeders of millet, but it's my own personal opinion, and I think Emma's too, that these birds, the population will eventually flatten out, and then they will be deemed an established exotic. So they are established, they are breeding here, they are breeding year round, and they make a lot of babies, but we're still crunching some data. So y'all can expect to see some good publications out from us on that project later this year. Migration urbanization study. This is one that hits home to me pretty closely. So this study is being done on 14 acres of swampland, smack dab in the middle of Orange Beach, Alabama. So if any of you have seen photos of Orange Beach or what Canal Road used to be 20 years ago, it is night and day from what it looked like then and what it looks like now. There's so much urbanization happening there, and we're using that site to study what sort of bird concentration is using that 14 acres of swamp. And is that going to increase with urbanization, or are we just going to see a complete fall off and birds just stop using that area because it's too fragmented? The last project on the list is looking for, and this is the real important part, looking for northern saw-whet owls. Northern saw-whet owls nest in the boreal forests of Canada, and they come south during the winter in their southerly push migration. But nobody quite knows how far south they go. There have been some records as far south as the coast, although the further south you get, the fewer and fewer there are. So Emma had a saw-whet owl site up in Auburn. I had one in Magnolia Springs, real close to Weeks Bay. And this entire winter season, we didn't hear a peep. So it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of sleepless nights showing up, sitting in a field in a chair with a call box going, hoping for a tiny flying bird or pillow to come out of the woods. But anyway, we will continue to monitor for northern saw-whets, and eventually we're going to get one.
That's the optimistic view, which I try to think about, but it's like Kyle said, it's a lot of sitting in the dark, hoping your next net run on a cold night will produce an owl.
Yeah, it gets a little difficult to sit out in a field in a chair until 2 or 3 in the morning when it's 27 degrees outside. But a lot of what we do as BCA, well, really most of it, we couldn't do without support from the public, either individuals or businesses that want to sponsor programs or events. So project level with our Southeastern Purple Martin project this year, Emma and I are still working out the details of an Adopt a Martin program, which basically means you can sign up to sort of sponsor that project for a certain number of birds, whether that be color bands to cover that cost, or maybe the cost of a geolocator, because the more we put out there, the higher chance of a return that we'll get. Or if you own a business or know of a business that might be interested in sponsoring either a project or an event, we can do that too. So if you have any questions about sponsor programs, feel free to give me a call or email me, and you'll see my email come up on the last slide of this presentation. But a lot of fantastic people, individuals have come to us and say, hey, love what you're doing. Here's a chunk of change. And we say, hey, this is awesome. Do you want us to list you as a sponsor on any of these programs? And they're like, nope, I don't want my name anywhere. So anonymity for some folks is key, and we really respect that and appreciate it. So just know that that's out there. Any other donations can just be made on our website if you don't want to be program, project, or event specific. So I think that may wrap me up, which will soon lead us into a Q&A, I believe. But for everybody at Francis and Weston, I want to thank y'all for letting us be here. And thanks everybody for showing up. This was fun. I hope it was a little educational. Fort Morgan is really, really close to heart for us. We've got a lot of skin in the game, and it was a place where we were trained, so we're happy to be back.
Yes, thank you.
Wow, terrific presentation. Very exciting. I'm so glad you're back at Fort Morgan. That was a twice-a-year trip for me and anybody. I remember my sister holding a banded bird, and the look in her eyes. She was probably, at the time, she was probably 65, and she looked like a little kid with great big eyes. So I know how important that is to the whole public. Thank you for your presentation. Any questions from the audience?
Well, great presentation. Thank you very much, Emma and Kyle. We look forward to seeing you back at Fort Morgan. Just seeing that your 2022 program is headline 2021. So just hope everybody noted the error there. This 2022, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Fair enough.
Okay. And I see, sadly, there's no spring banding program at Fort Morgan.
There is not. So there's a good reason for that. And the reason is the collaboration that encompasses several entities that has been doing spring banding for a few years before COVID really hit. They were first there doing spring after Bob died, and we're not going to fight for it. So if at some point they decide not to run a spring, I think if they don't run it this year, it'll be their third year canceling. But COVID had an impact on that too. So if they end up bowing out of Fort Morgan, we will do it. If they cancel it this year, I don't know that we're going to be able to pull everything together that quickly. Because there's a lot of logistics, finding housing for all of our volunteers, making sure that we have all our finances together for a big project like that. But just know if they end up falling out of the picture, we're going to be there 2023.
Super, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both so much for your, sorry, Lucy. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say thank you both so much for all the work you're doing. It's fantastic. We have been out and seen you a couple of times, and it's wonderful seeing the birds up and close. And I remember Emma holding a grey catbird up, and I had no idea that it was magenta underneath until she pointed it out. I mean, it's fascinating seeing them so close. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Gray catbirds can sometimes be one of our nemesises or nemesis because they eat purple berries and they end up staining shirts pretty bad. So I've actually got one of our crew shirts on. It might be kind of hard to see, but this is the gray catbird stain that you don't wash. So
Yeah, I try to keep our crew shirts clean, but after so long, it's like no matter how much bleach you put on it, it's just gonna be there. You just have to accept it.
I have a question here. As you know, I was kind of toggling between two different presentations, and I would run in here and listen a bit and then run back there. But one of the slides that you had up were the rare birds banded by the Hummingbird group. And were all of those birds on that list banded at Fort Morgan, or were some of them banded elsewhere?
They were all Fort Morgan.
Oh, okay. Wow. Evening grosbeak.
So a lot of these birds really were a wow to us too. In fact, just seeing the varied thrush show up was sort of crazy.
Yeah.
And then I was pretty excited to get a yellow-green vireo during our last spring banding session at our Orange Beach site. And then I was like, man, I think y'all were in on that discussion about how many yellow greens show up. And then we found out that the sergeants had banded one in the spring at Fort Morgan as well.
What season was evening grosbeak banded?
Sorry?
What season was the evening grosbeak banded?
I would have to look. Let me just verify that, and then I can send you and Lucy an email because I don't know off the top of my head. That was just a quick and little dirty, like, oh, I'm just gonna pull out all the rare birds from Fort Morgan. So I'll have to email you the details on that.
How about the golden crown sparrow?
I can email you the details about that too. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the seasonality of those. I would have off the top of my head, I would have to go in and check.
But that's one of the things that keeps birding interesting and banding as well, is that birds fly. They go places that they normally are not expected. And so every time I pick up my binoculars and go out birding, you know, I always wonder, what am I going to find? What am I going to see? And if it's something that's unusual, how am I going to document it? You know, those are the teasers that keep a lot of people going. And same thing with banding. You just never know till you pull that bird out of the net.
Absolutely. And Kyle and I are well aware of that, especially with the history of rare birds at Fort Morgan. You know, you never want to say, oh, maybe it's just a weird variant, you know, color variant. You know, we always check, because yeah, you could have a bird that you assume as a gray cheek thrush, and it's a Bicknell's thrush because you didn't, you know, check the measurements and the color. And so yeah, Kyle and I, we really have to stay on our toes, and I enjoy that because yeah, it's sort of a challenge of, okay, don't just assume that it's the common species. You know, you could have some that are not going to be so obvious, like Bicknell's thrush, or a flycatcher like Hammond's flycatcher, or you know, the yellow-green vireo, where you might would say, oh, it's just a yellowy, you know, red-eyed vireo, and it's a yellow-green vireo. So it keeps us on our toes for sure.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. When I pulled that yellow-green vireo, I was like, this is a funky looking red eye. But when I initially banded it, I recorded it as a red eye because I wasn't familiar with yellow greens. But one of my favorite things about the birding and banding community is how willing everyone is to just pour out information. So I was really excited that I got good documentation of that bird, and it's supplied another record for Alabama.
I want you to know that I almost banded the yellow-green vireo.
Well, I went out to check the nets one morning before I had coffee, and there was a yellow-green vireo in the net. I got it in my hands. I was so excited. I lost it. It
Oh.
flew off.
That's what I was saying about the McGillivrary's warbler, as I was happy to be naive and just, ignorance is bliss. I didn't know as a trainee that that bird could have slipped out of my hands and it would have been a record McGillivrary's warbler.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could definitely feel your pain. And I have had other birds slip away, Mexican whippoorwill in Texas, just like that, where it was like, I'd worked all night for it and it just slipped out of my hands. So definitely know that feeling.
It's a pain.
Well, the moral of that is always have coffee before you go out and check your nets.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate everything that you're doing, and I know it's a lot of work. And especially thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks for
Yeah.
having us.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Oh, Jim, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I had hit my unmute. Thank you so much for the presentation. Loved hearing it. Are there any questions or comments from anybody else? We can unmute you all, I guess, if we want to, can't we, Dan?
Thanks for the great presentation. We really enjoyed it. And we look forward to seeing your banding operations.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we have a board meeting next Tuesday, and at that meeting, we will discuss what we're going to do for our February membership meeting. Thank you all for coming. And
You mean Thursday or do you mean Tuesday?
sorry.
Did you mean Tuesday or Thursday next week?
Oh, didn't I tell you I changed the date?